Okay.
So we open the panelist session. For this session, we have online Marco Cavalleri from EMA, Melanie Saville from CEPI, and present in the room, Abdul Ghaffar from WHO, and Abdul have kindly accepted to chair this session.
Thank you, John Daniel. So I will not chair. I'm happy to moderate if you allow me to do that. Okay. So thank you very much. So I think these are very nice presentations which you both made. I have a few remarks before I ask the panelists online and to a few. John Daniel, you made a presentation on priority setting, and there you have implementation research, social science research, basic science research. And then, Madam, you made the presentation on research funding, and it went all the way to the basic science research and the clinical research, because there was hardly any issues raised or discussed. How can we fund more social science research, more implementation research, more systems research, more policy research? And to me, that's a very natural way we drift as scientists, because most of us here, I'm just assuming now, so if I'm wrong, are basic science clinical researchers here. They're hardly in the room, maybe one or two who are the social scientists, or maybe systems researchers or policy researchers. So to me, that gives an inherent bias to all of us. And it's not like I'm not making any comment, like I think basic science researchers, clinical scientists perhaps are the most important, and they have proven during the pandemic by producing the vaccine in less than 2 years. However, the issues in the morning, in the opening remarks, the Director General of the Ministry of Health of the French government used the word 3 times sustainability, but we have not used the word systems or society. The system only came once when was the reminder systems, and then I think Sarah mentioned system very lightly. The reason I'm highlighting all these points is that vaccines production, use is important. However, we have realized that despite very serious ongoing pandemic, some sort of a hesitancy has gone up, both into the younger population, relatively older population, and that's across. If you look at the social section, it is not the people who are not educated. We have mentioned again and again migrants and the vulnerable, but there's a very stable, healthy, educated population who has put their foot down, and they said, we don't want vaccines. I live in Switzerland, I don't live here, but it is an alarming number we have, the people who are reluctant to have the vaccine. Having said that now, I have questions for the panelists. One of the issues we have, how do we fund our research in health? My experience, I studied, lived in US, I've living in Europe. The funding mechanism right now for the research funding, it is based on the topic. You will find a researcher who is expert in infectious disease control, and then maybe TB, maybe an HIV/AIDS. And that's the way the funding mechanisms are established in all over the world. What we want is, if we really want to improve all these things which you said since morning, is and I'm not going to pick the word. It may be transdisciplinary research, maybe multidisciplinary research, whatever we want to call it. Right now, I don't know any school of public health where there's a transdisciplinary research team and there's a transdisciplinary research funding. I don't know which agency funds in Europe. MRC, CDC is obviously disease control. The word is disease control. So the first question is there a natural bias that we drift as scientists from systems, social science, policy research towards basic science and clinical research because that's easy or there's a funding available? So that's John Daniel to you, and then I will come to Karian.
Yes, it works. Thanks a lot, Abdul, for this comment. I completely agree with you, and I think it's the relevance of this kind of prioritization. It's to highlight what are the needs for at the end, and the needs are not always to have funds for basic research, but to have this overview of what we need and the fact that we need to implement vaccine in the real life, and which is not the case. And you know, I'm basically before all a man of basic research as an immunologist, so it's quite easy for us in a way to find fundings for our research, but it's harder if you want to implement directly the vaccination in your country. I completely agree.
Thank you very much. Karian, so do you think there's a real challenge for research funding? Because the research funding systems are biased towards the basic science, clinical research side, and we miss, if we want to really look, if we have to, we all know how to communicate, but that's a communication with Lancet or the BMJ. So is there a bias towards clinical research as compared to other, even in the vaccine development?
Can you hear me?
Yep. Yes, you can.
I think this is also, we didn't ask or phrase the questions like that. We really wanted to investigate where are the funding going. And I think that what our survey also said that it's basic research and it's the early stages who gets the most funding. And particularly from a national public health institute, I think it's really important to also have funding for implementation of vaccines in new programs, to do the long-term safety follow-up, but also to do the real-world evidence. Particularly, we have seen that with the COVID-19 vaccine. So maybe we could open up for Marco and Melanie to comment on that as well.
Yes, thank you very much. Marco?
Yeah, no, I think the point from Marianne is an important one, and we got a lot of learning from COVID on a lot of different areas, and I think we should cover them all. We should not leave anything out of the scope of what should be covered in terms of research and our research agenda. If I can start indeed with the post-authorization activities, this has turned out critical. And that's why, as Karam was saying before, together with the ECDC, we are trying to build up a new system that would help all the member states to collaborate together with the two European agencies in order to have an infrastructure that can run rapidly studies both on safety and effectiveness of vaccines, not only during crisis, but also on a regular basis, so that we can answer any type of research question that is still out. And honestly, there has been a point in time here during the pandemic that all this real world evidence that were coming from Israel and US were so informative and so important. And we were wondering, where are we in Europe? What is happening in Europe? Why we are behind? And one of the big hurdles here is how to make sure that the healthcare system from different member states can talk to each other. So have to have a network that is supranational, because only like this, we will have the power to conduct studies very rapidly that will give us all the information that we want really in a short period of time. So this is the ambition, and this where what we want to build together with the ECDC and the member states, because of course the member states, they have the information, the starting point, the data are in their hands. But we need to make sure that we have a system that is able to merge all this data, allow the system to talk to each other, and collect all this data on effectiveness and safety as rapidly as possible and in a very robust way. I think we can do it in Europe. So it's a matter really of putting together all the efforts and joining forces and make this happen, because this will also be the starting factor to address also hesitancy, communication on vaccines. Only hard data will be very effective in convincing people. So we need to make sure that this is happening. And then, of course, there are many other areas, and I just quote the ability of conducting large clinical trials in Europe. That is something that also was missing. We saw that in the US, they were able to set up very rapidly the infrastructure to run phase 3 trials for COVID-19 in a matter of a few weeks, while in Europe, we were really behind, and we really needed to, prepare the ground to make sure that this is happening. Now we got these new consortia coming up, like Accelerate, that have the potential to make this happening, and we should enable them to really be effective in running multinational clinical trials that will be faster and will address all the questions. Of course, the problem with phase 2, phase 3 trials is that they are tremendously expensive. And that's why also specific grants in Europe so far have not been able to cope with any of these, or at least not to cover full the cost of all of them. This is an area that we need to work on. And I believe, again, here we have the chance of building, first of all, the infrastructure, the network, the capacity of doing studies, the capacity of doing immunogenicity evaluation, the capacity of doing also laboratory work more in general with pathogens that might be BSL-3, BSL-4, and then, to see what could be the best framework for funding, whether ERA could play an important role here. Because again, and maybe my last point for the time being would be that in Europe, research has always been funded with all these very specific grants, not looking at really a portfolio approach, not looking into the broader perspective. And maybe it's time now also to think about the broader perspective, thinking not just about giving grant for small pieces of research, but trying to think where we are heading to, and try to have a more coherent and consistent way of looking into what would be the final outcome in terms of having new vaccines and convincing more people to get vaccinated.
Thank you, sir. Is Melanie online?
Yes, I am, and thank you.
Okay.
Maybe I can just add a few points to those of Marco. And I think really what the critical issue is, what is the long-term goal of any specific research, any particular vaccine that you're looking at, that unless you have that true long-term goal, you don't know where the research questions or when the research questions need to be specifically answered. And certainly from a CEPI perspective, for those who may not know us, so Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, we set out 5 years ago with a goal of accelerating vaccine development for priority pathogens for emerging infectious diseases, and obviously reacted very quickly to the COVID-19 outbreak and have learned a huge amount from what our objectives were, which were really quite long-term objectives for the vaccines that we're developing and for COVID-19. And I think one of the critical pieces there is having the right partnerships in place. And COVAX is a good example of that, with CEPI managing the R&D and manufacturing side, Gavi, the procurement, WHO fair allocation, and UNICEF for delivery. Quite early on in the pandemic, we had that end-to-end approach, which I think helps to focus in on what are the right research questions when you're really looking across the various organizations that see things in quite a different way. And to your point, how much social science can you introduce into the clinical research to help prepare for the introduction of a vaccine is a critical piece there. We all have our own expertise, but we need the expertise of others to make sure that we optimize the research that we're doing, and that the funding comes in that regard. And I think from a funding perspective, these are often global questions, and it's about collaboration also between funders. CEPI has an example of, obviously we have co-funded a number of projects through Horizon 2020 funding and Horizon Europe moving forward. So in that regard, you know, I think it's about funders getting together also and utilizing the resources in the best and most efficient way possible. I really do agree with what Marco says. We should not be looking at funding small chunks of things. That is the way to move things forward very slowly. A fully integrated approach clearly is a much better approach and will accelerate the development, licensure, and introduction of vaccines. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very cautious of the time, so I will make a remark and then we'll go for any questions. My only plea is, like there's a European Space Agency, they manufacture these rockets which go into the space or should go into the space. And they spend a lot of money in manufacturing those rockets, but they also manufacture in the delivery system. So I think we need to invest whatever we are doing in the basic science, clinical research, vaccines, to invest some in the delivery science so that we know how can we deliver whatever we have produced. So in the interest of time, is there any question? Otherwise, I'll come back to the panelist. Okay, I think people are really hungry. So Melanie, I have a question because you said funding is complex and fragmented. And then you say the money, most of the governments don't invest. Do you have any idea? Why do you think governments don't invest money into the R&D?
Why most money goes into R&D?
Yeah, but not from the governments.
But I think it's very easy and tangible because then you are actually financing a product, a vaccine, but to really financing surveillance system to do real world evidence effectiveness, you really have to fund the sources within the countries, which is more harder. So then you need really to be able to collaborate more on funding. But I think that is really needed because if we want to implement vaccines in the population, we need to understand vaccine hesitancy. We need to have surveillance systems because you don't only need a vaccine, you need to track and diagnose the disease, and you also have to follow the use when you have implemented it into the population, also for risk patients and the follow-up.
Thank you very much. Jan Daniel, you have 30 seconds to close and say whatever you want to say.
Yes. Thanks to all for this session. Just one concluding remarks. We have to keep in mind that obviously we have spoken a lot of COVID-19, but we still have important research questions on all vaccine and, for instance, on measles vaccine acceptance and so on. So don't forget also these important questions. And I close the session and thanks to you, Abdul.
And thank you to both
the
Melanie
panelists,
and
to Marco
also.
and Melanie.
Okay, thank you to both. Thank you very much.